Once upon a time, in a small remote village nestled near Onu in the heart of northern Nigeria, life moved at its own unhurried pace. Traditions here were not just customs. They were the very threads that wove the community together, passed down from one generation to the next, as old as the ancient baobab trees that dotted the landscape. Among these traditions was one held with particular reverence, a ceremony that marked a girl's passage into womanhood. It was a rite that every single girl in the village was expected to undergo at a certain age. This practice, known as female circumcision, was considered an essential step, a sacred duty to welcome them into the fold of adult women. The ceremony was always a grand affair. The village would buzz with anticipation, drums would beat, songs would fill the air, and families would gather to celebrate. To the outside world, it might have looked like a joyous festival, but behind the vibrant colors and festive sounds lay a hidden, darker reality. For the young girls at the center of it all, this was a day of immense fear and excruciating pain. The procedure was often carried out in unhygienic conditions, with crude instruments by elder women who, despite their best intentions, had no medical training. The consequences were devastating. Over the years, many young girls had succumbed to the aftermath of this brutal practice. Some bled to death, their small bodies unable to withstand the trauma. Others developed severe infections that claimed their lives days or weeks later. Those who survived were often left with lifelong scars, both physical and emotional. They faced chronic pain, complications in childbirth, and a constant reminder of the day their innocence was violently stripped away. Yet, despite the tragedies, the tradition persisted. It was so deeply ingrained in the village's culture that questioning it was unthinkable. The fear of this tradition was a silent shadow that hung over every girl's childhood. They heard the hushed whispers of the pain, they saw the haunted looks in the eyes of the older girls, and they knew their turn would come. The social pressure was immense. Any family who dared to refuse this right for their daughter faced the harshest of punishments. Banishment. They would be cast out from the community, their names erased from the village's memory, forced to fend for themselves in a world that saw them as outcasts. To be banished was to be condemned to a life of isolation and shame, a fate many considered worse than death. So families complied, sacrificing their daughters' well-being on the altar of tradition. But one day, something shifted. A young girl named Adana had just come of age. She was known for her bright eyes and her curious spirit. She loved to listen to the elders' stories, but she also possessed a sharp mind that questioned everything. As the date of her ceremony approached, a knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She had seen her older friends suffer, and she couldn't accept that this was her destiny. One evening, she gathered all her courage and approached her father. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were firm. "Father," she said, "I will not do it. I will not be circumcised." Her father, a kind man who loved his daughter dearly, was stunned. He knew the risks, but he also knew the consequences of defiance. He tried to reason with her, explaining that it was their custom, their way of life. But Adana stood her ground. "If it is a tradition that kills our daughters and leaves them in pain, then it is a bad tradition," she argued, her voice filled with a conviction far beyond her years. Her words struck a chord in her father's heart. He looked at his brave, determined daughter and saw not a disobedient child but a future leader. He made a decision that would change their lives forever. He would stand with her. The news of their refusal spread through the village like wildfire. The reaction was swift and merciless. The villagers turned their backs on Adana and her family. Lifelong friends averted their gazes. Neighbors who once shared meals with them now shut their doors. The once friendly chatter of the village square fell silent whenever they passed. The market, the lifeblood of the community, became a place of hostility. No one would sell them food or supplies. "They are taboo," the vendors would whisper, shunning them as if they carried a terrible disease. The family was completely isolated, an island of defiance in a sea of conformity. Days turned into weeks, and the family's supplies dwindled. They survived on what little they could forage from the surrounding wilderness. Adana felt the weight of her decision, the pain of seeing her family suffer because of her choice. But every time she looked at her father's supportive face, she knew she had done the right thing. They were alone, but they were together, and their bond was stronger than ever. They were fighting not just for her, but for a future where no girl would have to endure what was demanded of her. Then a pivotal event occurred. The village chief's own daughter, a girl named Chamaka, reached the age for her ceremony. The chief was a staunch traditionalist, a man who had publicly condemned Adana's family and upheld the ancient laws with an iron fist. The village expected a grand ceremony, a reaffirmation of their sacred customs. But the day came and went with an eerie silence. There were no drums, no songs. Whispers started to circulate. Where was Chamaka? It soon came to light that the chief, the very guardian of tradition, had hidden his daughter away. He couldn't bear the thought of putting his own beloved child through the ordeal he so fervently prescribed for others. When he looked into his daughter's fearful eyes, he didn't see a tradition to be upheld. He saw his little girl, and his heart broke. The hypocrisy was laid bare for all to see. This act shattered the village's collective consciousness. The man who was supposed to be their unwavering leader had flinched when the tradition touched his own family. The villagers began to look at the practice with new eyes. They saw Adana's family, starving but unbowed, and they saw their chief, a hypocrite hiding in the shadows. The questions that Adana had dared to ask now echoed. In everyone's mind, why did they inflict this pain on their daughters? What honor was there in a tradition that brought so much suffering? If the chief himself wouldn't subject his daughter to it, why should they? Slowly, tentatively, things began to change. One by one, families started to speak out. The spell of fear was broken. The villagers realized that what you are unwilling to have done to yourself or to your own loved ones, you should never do to another. The chief's secret act of love for his daughter inadvertently became the catalyst for a revolution. Adana's bravery had planted a seed, and the chief's hypocrisy had watered it, allowing it to grow into a movement that would finally bring an end to the age-old trauma. The village learned a profound lesson. True community is built not on blind adherence to tradition, but on empathy, courage, and the protection of its most vulnerable members. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched you, please share it and subscribe for more content that aims to inspire change. See you next time.